Bill Winchester. What's up, man? The man, the myth, the legend. Welcome to Dad Edge, brother.
Hey, thanks so much. Good to be here, man.
Good to have you on, man, and to talk about this exciting topic, which is rites of passage for young boys entering into manhood. I'm a huge believer in this, man. I love this topic, and it's something that has been lost over the years, and something that is so needed to come back. So I'm excited to talk about that. But before we jump right in, I just want to give the guys some context on who Bill is, what he is all about, and what your family even looks like.
Yeah, so I am a husband and father. My wife Christy and I met in high school. It's kind of funny. We have three kids. We got busy having kids right away. So I met Christy when I was 15 and she was 17. So I was where we went to high school. It was 10th, 11th, 12th. So I was an incoming sophomore, brand new to the school, and she was a senior, and we got connected right away. But she looked much younger than me. So we got married. I was 21 and she was 24. Within 6 months, we were pregnant. So by the about 6 months, 7 months in, she looked really, really pregnant. And I had a full beard, looked about 30. She looked about 15. And we got dirty looks everywhere we went. But it's funny because I've always, can joke around about the fact she's 3 years older than I am. So my high school sweetheart, and then we have a daughter, Emily, who just turned 21. My son, Jacob, is sophomore up at Whitworth University playing football for them. And then my youngest, Zeke, is going to be a senior this year at Bend High School in the community that we just moved to a couple of years ago.
Wow, man. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, and so how many kids do you have?
Three.
Yeah. And what are the ages again?
21, 19, and 17.
Wow. Boys and girls, what's the mix? So the audience knows.
Just the oldest is a daughter.
So the oldest is a daughter.
Yeah.
So she's in the front, and then you got boys. Okay. So I want to talk about and how long you've been married for, you said?
22 years. I was a smart guy. I got married in January of 2020. So whatever year it is, that's how long I've been married.
You know what? That's really good. And it wasn't 2020, it was 2000, right?
2000. That's right. Sorry. Yeah. I can still get the number, whatever year it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you, man. That's good math, dude. It's very, very good math. Yeah. I know we're going to jump right into, rites of passage and why that's important for boys, but your oldest is a daughter. And I would love to talk about that. Like, what's most meaningful and important for you over the past over the years of raising a daughter now in her 20s? What's been most meaningful and impactful for you to raise your daughter with, as far as life lessons, your approach to it? What's most meaningful for her to learn, maybe at some of these super important ages?
Yeah, absolutely. So my daughter, Emily, it's funny. We had always had the kids. We've been in church our whole lives. The kids grew up in church. When they were born, I actually built a church facility. I was in construction doing that kind of work. I built a church that we had been attending for years and attended for years after that. So like they were 7, 5, and 4, 7, 6, and 4 while we're building it. So they've got the run of this place. That's what they knew, and they grew up in it. Always really outgoing and welcomed by the people around them. So my kids have always been really confident. But Emily, her thing was singing and acting. And I'm telling you all this because a couple of years ago, right before we moved to Bend, and right before COVID hit and shut so much stuff down, she had finally landed. She landed the lead in a play that she was a part of. She was the mother duck in a play, The Ugly Duckling. And it was such a wonderful thing to get to see her blossom into that. And all these other kids around her. So she was 18 at the time. And all these younger kids that were a part of this. And she won an award. I forget, they call it the Rose or something. All the kids vote on who is the one that they most looked up to and appreciated in the cast. And what came of that is I got to get up and say a little bit of something about her at the end of the award ceremony, at the end of the run of the play. And I shared with I remember sharing that for all the guys who never had a girl or they didn't have a girl first, they were missing out on the blessing that I had, because it was really a blessing. I wasn't expecting or hoping either way. We annoyed a lot of our family by not finding out about any of our kids. They were all surprises. But when she arrived, and as I'm sure you can relate, your firstborn, it just changes everything. But there was something about having a girl first, and it prepares your heart to view the world in a different way. And so she's always been daddy's girl and had a really close connection. And I've gotten to watch her blossom through those things and encourage her. And one of the most rewarding things is that lately, she's 21 now, and she's always been active in church and Bible studies and leading in the youth group. And she went to early college when she was in high school, graduated with her associate. So she started college down here in Bend as a junior at 18 or 19 rather, and has just been really driven. And as that has all happened, like the dating scene and boys and all of that has been kind of a slower thing. She never got caught up in it the way so many others did. And I'm telling you all this because the other day she's starting to recognize, I just want to find a nice guy. And she talks with her mom about this more than me. But one of the things that Christy shared with me, and actually Emily kind of did in a roundabout way the other day too, she's like, they're boring. Some of these guys, they're just boring. They're not like dad. They don't do the kind of stuff. They don't challenge. We would go on hikes. We would do, all kinds of things. I mean, Emily's different than my boys, obviously, as a girl that wasn't into sports as much, but she hung in there and fought with them in a way that, only an older sister could. And so I've been so blessed to see that she's seen what we've done as a family. And in particular, she's seen the way I've cared for her. And that, I don't have to wait until she's married and there's problems and she's coming home crying about how this guy is, not leading right. She's able to sense and pick up on that stuff right away. So for all the things as a father that I felt like, man, I could have done that better. I've been encouraged to see that the little things that they're observing all the way through, they leave an impression. And that's one of the things that I've been learning and really excited about, is that as fathers, we have all these cumulative impacts, or not impacts, but things that we do that leave an impression, and they leave deep impressions that we don't even necessarily know we're putting in there.
I'm really curious because, we've had so many other men come on the podcast and talk about raising daughters. And I love talking about this topic because I love serving the men in the audience who have the daughters, because to be honest, like I'm not that guy. Like I have all, 4 boys. So obviously I don't have any firsthand experience with this, but I always like to go back to like previous things that other guests have talked about. So let me run a couple things by you here, and I just want to get your response.
Sure.
So I've heard many, many times that my daughter is going to learn what it means to be loved by a man by how, number one, I love her, right? I love my daughter, and how she sees me love her mom. Yeah. So as you reflect upon those things over the past 20, 22 years, right? Loving her mom, your wife, obviously loving her. What are some of the things that have been most meaningful for you to be like, hey, if she's going to learn this way, then I'm going to do things like this. And what does this look like, or had looked like?
Well, one of the things that's been really fun, and I included both her and her brothers in it, is anytime. So 2 things came to mind. Anytime Christy would go away on a women's retreat or a girls' weekend like that, and sometimes it'd be a couple hours away, the kids, I would get them involved, and we would put together like a little care package. Usually it was like one of those Rubbermaid totes full of treats, things she likes, things the girls could use. And we would find the place they were at, and I would let the kids sneak up, leave this thing on the doorstep, and ring the doorbell, and we'd take off. So we would plan things together.
Oh, dude, that is gold, man.
Yeah. We've got some great pictures of them hiding in the dark around the corner from places where Christy was at. And, they just loved that. And so they would get excited when mom was going to go away, because one, they knew that dad and them were going to do some fun things, but also, are we going to sneak out and go, leave a surprise for mom? So that's one of the things that had been really fun, and just built this sense in them that, and I know Emily had seen that, like my dad, when my mom is away, cares about her and involves us in making sure that she understands she's missed, and we're looking forward to her coming back. And then the other thing is that probably at least 2/3 of the time when I would bring Christy flowers, I'd bring flowers for Emily also. And she'd get her own little bouquet of flowers. Sometimes it might just be one, but she frequently saw that when mom got flowers, she got flowers too. And it just starts laying a foundation that I expect her to expect the men that want to be near to her to pursue her, and to not think that this is going to be an easy thing, and to respect her, and to treasure her. So we've talked about, we had the sex talk, and we've had all of those things we need to talk about, and those can seem like somewhat functional things. And it was interesting, talking about that book Dad Tired that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
He talks in there about the difference between raising kids that are good moral people and kids that are intentionally seeking out a relationship with God. And that's what we've tried to do, because I watched so many pastors' kids and my kids being raised in the church so much. I remember Zeke being, and I'm sorry to get off the subject of girls, but I remember Zeke being like 4 years old, 5 years old, and going into Sunday school one morning, and the teacher started, and he goes, "Oh my goodness." And the teacher says, "What? We have to learn about Noah again?"
Oh my
He's
God.
like 4 or 5 years old, and he's just, it's so ingrained that he's like, "This is boring." And it was at that point that we knew we've got to make this exciting. We've got to start finding some ways to take it out of the church classroom, out of the church building, and show them how this can apply to their lives. And so we loved their mom together that way. They got to see me love their mom that way. And we were really open and real with them about the struggles that we had too. And we, for whatever reason, Christy had a really solid upbringing. Mine was pretty rough. And so, like, I watched my parents go through a lot of trauma. And I was the opposite of my kids. I was the oldest boy, and then I had 2 younger sisters. And so I was very much in a protective mode, trying to kind of keep the peace and maintain things. But what happened is when Christy and I started having kids, we really didn't want to hide the difficult times from them, because that's how it was in Christy's house. Like, she never knew that her parents fought. And then when she got into her later teens and found out that there was things, I think it kind of bothered her to realize that they would hide this stuff, because she felt ill prepared to deal with it when, at 24 years old, her 21-year-old husband is leaving towels or underwear on the floor, and there's conflict. And it really, troubled her to feel that way, having not seen it before. So we try to, keep the kids engaged and let them see a healthy version of the conflict in marriage, of the joy in marriage, of the troubles and the successes. And then for Emily, we've had daddy-daughter dates going back a long, long ways, daddy-daughter dance. We started probably in their early teens, trying to alternate years. In the summer, Christy would take the boys on a 1 or 2 night trip, just her and one of the boys, and I would do Emily, and then we'd switch the next year, and just really trying to be intentional about letting them know how important they are as a part of the family.
That's really cool, man. I love these, especially like these memorable, like little adventures where you plan like these gifts, or you plan like to make your presence known, even though it's not your physical presence, which I think is really, really cool. A lot of people, I don't think, do that. Or they don't think to do that, and to even allow their kids to take part in that fun. Because if you think about it, like, it is cool for your kids to like kind of go on a mission with you to honor like your wife, right? And to like, oh, we're gonna do this really cool thing for mom. How, it's gonna be so awesome to see her surprised and see her happy about it, and that kind of thing, which I think is awesome, man. And good on you for doing that, because that's, it's one thing for us to do it. It's another thing to bring the kids along for the ride, because I think they get a lot out of it. So that's really cool. I want to move over a little bit to rites of passage for young men. So you have, excuse me, you said 19 and 17. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. 19 and 17. When was it that it was obvious to you that like, hey, not only do maybe my boys need something like this, but the world kind of needs something like this.
I think it was obvious, for a while, but I'll give you a little background. So my mom's parents drowned together in front of her and her three older siblings when my mom was 2. So my mom's whole side of the family was just wrecked by that.
Oh
And
my
then she
God.
was, from different dysfunctional relatives to foster care, different things. Um, so that's what she had to parent from. And then my dad, at 3, his dad walked out and went, had a relationship with another woman, had some other kids, and I still remember my dad telling me about, after years, I think, of not seeing his dad, his dad was a over the road truck driver, and he's coming into town to visit him, and so my dad's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7, and he's running out to this big rig that he remembers, and dad's there. And instead of dad stepping out and coming towards him, dad has to stop and take these other 2 little boys out. And this is years ago. I remember my dad telling me about this and the way it felt for him. And so that kind of abandonment and that kind of trouble, and then the stepdads and stuff that come into his life, that's where my parents parented from. And so I mentioned earlier, as a firstborn, protecting my 2 younger sisters, like my childhood was all about do everything right, don't screw up, protect your sisters, and just maintain. And so there was nothing in the way of an initiation for me. I've joked with guys that I've talked with this about. I graduated high school and I got luggage from my parents as a gift, and they weren't necessarily saying, okay, get out of here, but that's what they knew to do. And so when my boys came along, I was immediately hungry because I wanted something more for them. And Christy and I were really intentional. We wanted our kids to progress, but I didn't have a model to work from at all. And for me, being raised in the church, I thought that there was going to be something in there, and I would look to a lot of those resources, and I didn't find anything really solid that seemed to fit the bill. So I started what ended up being a long search. Part of what led me to connect with you deeper, of looking for what does it mean to lead boys into manhood with intention.
And what were some of first of all, my God, like I can't imagine that situation. Yeah. Of witnessing something like that, right? But what were some of the things that came to mind when you think about leading boys into manhood? Here's the funny thing, man. Like you and I were talking about this before we got started today. So right before COVID hit and the shutdowns hit, I too had like this, wake up call, so to speak, right? That I was like, my boys need a rite of passage, right? Some sort of way to celebrate them moving from boyhood to manhood, right? And in cultures in the past, I did some research on this. I've had other people come on the podcast and talk about it. Cultures in the past, in order for you to have a seat at the table with the other men, right, you had to earn it, right? The Spartans did the agoge. There's been many other cultures out there, tribes, and all these other things that like sometimes like, you go out in the woods and you survive for like 2 days, right? And then you come back and you've earned a seat at the table. My journey and search for what is a good rite of passage, what's a solid rite of passage for a young boy, really, I couldn't find a whole lot. But what I did do is I took both of my boys, the ones who are the oldest, 16 and 14-year-old, and I did this when they were 13 and 11, is I took them on like this monster hike. And this might sound somewhat irresponsible, but I really I really emphasize the word hike because it really wasn't a climb, but we did 14ers. We hiked up a 14,000 foot mountain. We did this in Breckenridge, and my plan was or it not was, but it was what it was. We hiked up this mountain, and the mountain represented the hike to the top as your final steps as a young boy, and then the summit is this is the top of the mountain for boyhood, right? This is where boyhood ends. And the first few steps down the descent of this mountain represent your first steps into manhood. And there were several things that I did, on the way up that hike. I mean, it was no joke. It was 13 and a half hour round trip, hike. And we stopped a lot, and we did exercises together, and I read to them, and there were pillars of manhood that we talked about, on each stop. And then at the very top, we culminated that hike with like this really cool letter that I wrote the boys, and what it meant to be a boy, going to manhood. It had elements in there of honesty, integrity, character, telling the truth, a work ethic, how you treat women, money management, friends, circle of friends, making sure that you have a tribe, of like-minded individuals in your life, not just the crazy people, right? Or the degenerates. And it was cool. But I also felt like, man, there are things here that I'm missing. I know that I'm missing, or there are other experiences that I could sprinkle in here. And then when 2020 hit, I was like, you know what, I'm going to create this, and I'm going to create this for other men. And I was going to do an entire retreat for men and their sons in 2020 in Breckenridge. And unfortunately, COVID shut everything down. And we had guys like yourself, you signed up for it. I had other guys signed up for it. Well, unfortunately, it just never happened because of the shutdowns. Now, what I've done is I've partnered with Bedros Koulian for the Squire event, which is a rite of passage. And I went through that, and I can't really talk about the evolutions that we experienced because of confidentiality. You just have to experience it. But it was 15 hours, and it's run by, it was more military based, because it's run by like a Navy SEAL, and then a special forces guy, and Bedros. And but each evolution taught you something within how you're leading your son, and then how your son can be a better leader. And there were definitely elements in there that I would sprinkle in. But I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is really what I want you to talk about, is, man, if I'm going to create a rite of passage, right? Or what is the right thing for a rite of passage? A lot of us, quite frankly, Bill, I mean, we don't know what they are, because we haven't even experienced them ourselves, and they've been out of our culture for so long that we're like, okay, I could go back to the old school stuff, right? But how appropriate is that for some of the challenges the kids face today? So for you, how did you sit down at the drawing table, and what ideas emerged for you as like, this is what this is going to look like for these kids?
It's interesting. It took a very similar approach to how I've been in construction for 25 plus years, working for myself for most of that time. And just my personality type, I've always been up for a challenge. Like, I'll dive in and I'll kind of figure it out. People talk about fake it till you make it as either a good thing or a bad thing. And whichever side of the fence you fall on, that's how I often did it. And as time has progressed in the last 20 plus years of doing that, it's become even easier, right? Because we've got the internet that we didn't have before, and you can jump on and you can Google something, you can find a YouTube, you can go research podcasts. So in the same way that I used to approach construction issues or vehicle issues, I started applying that to this rite of passage stuff. Because like you said, I had signed up for the event you were going to do, and was really excited about that because we were in a big time of transition. I was a little late to the game with like an official rite of passage. We had been doing the work of talking about these things and intentionally leading our boys and our daughter through some of these growing up times. I mentioned before, I think we started that my wife and I would take one-on-one trips with each of the kids once a year. And those were great times to talk about the things that they were experiencing right then. Without them having to worry about brother or sister listening in. So we were doing some of that stuff, but it wasn't anything formalized. And I want to be careful, the formalized part of it is important. Like, kids want to see that there's something to this, especially the younger siblings looking up and seeing this happen to the older ones. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be something intimidating and perfected. Because one of the great things, excuse me, and I want to go back and say, I said all of that to say, I started listening to podcasts. I, put in rite of passage and see what comes up. And there were a number of them. And one of them was, a couple of them were with guys talking about the crazy rite of passage stuff that used to be. And there was a tribe, I think in South America, that would do this land diving, so they would build these structures out of bamboo, and the elders in the tribe would just kind of take a thumb different look at the guy and figure, okay, he weighs about this much. We're going to build this rope out of vines that should stop him to where his head just barely touches the soft ground at the bottom, and he won't die. And then other cultures have these, they make gloves out of leaves and fill them with bullet ants. And the boys got to, wear these ants with these, and it's like, the highest level of pain on the Schofield scale. And they're supposed to wear them for like 10 minutes while they're dancing around, pretending it doesn't hurt. And I think the Malawi in Africa, they'll go on a trek to kill a lion, stuff like that. And I thought, how do you incorporate that? And what are the important elements of that? So I started listening to podcasts and I started reading up on it and finding some of the same stuff you mentioned that, all throughout time, this has been something that prior to this kind of first world Western culture that we live in now, it was understood that there's going to come a time when you don't get to be a boy anymore.
Yeah.
But you don't get to just be a man all of a sudden either. And so much of what I see in Western culture now is these false initiations of drinking or having sex or, getting your license, going on your first trip in the car by yourself. So many of those things get put forward as, you're a man now. And they're not, they're boys in men's bodies is what it is. And so I started really trying to figure out, well, how do you make that transition? And one of the great books that I came across as I was going through all this is by a guy by the name of Richard Rohr, called Adam's Return. I don't know if you,
I haven't. No, I haven't heard that.
One of the things as I was reading through that, and you go back and you look at so many of these initiations or rites of passage, there's a separation element. And we see this even in like Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey that so many people will know about as like, there's 7 basic stories and every movie follows one of them. There's this time where the hero, and in this case, it's going to be our sons, is removed from everything he knew and is in a place where he's unsure of what he's supposed to do. He's unsure of who he is. And Rohr talks about that as liminal spaces, which liminal goes back to the root word Latin, and it's like the threshold. So you're in that space between one room and another. And so behind you is the boyhood that you've left behind. And in front of you is the manhood that you're going into, but there's this period of time where you're neither. And in so many of these ancient cultures, like you were a nobody. There were certain tribes where the women would shun the boys. They'd enter into a hut and start this process. They'd come out of it and the women would ignore them or they'd throw dirt on them. They'd be a nobody until they completed this process. And then they get welcomed back when they have something of value, when they are responsible and can help the village or the tribe. And I started recognizing, one, that you need to have something to contribute. We've lost that element. We've got 30-year-olds living in their parents' basement, contributing nothing. Right. And 2, you are going to go through a process that it's going to be a process. So I'll get long-winded on this because I'm passionate. I don't want to go too far without giving you a chance to clarify if there's anything I'm skipping over here. But that book in particular, and I've just been devouring stuff for years on this, trying to get a better picture of this process. And what I've come to understand is it's a process. And what I found really valuable with my oldest son, Jake, is I involved other men. That idea of there being a tribe. And I'm sure you've seen it with your boys playing sports. You can tell them something that you observe from the sideline when you're not in maybe coaching, if you're just a parent, or even as a coach. And I had this, I'm coaching my boys' football teams and I'll tell my son something about his drop back and he's, whatever, Dad. And then I can go get Hector, the other guy who isn't his dad, to come over and say it. Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll try that. That makes sense. It's nothing different, but it's that other person.
Yeah.
And so, I can tell you a little bit about what I did with my son, Jake. And I can tell you about what I'm doing differently now with my son, Zeke. And I could tell you about what I would recommend, what I'm going to try and help men with their boys at even younger ages to be intentional about it. I don't know where you want to go with this.
I do. Let's actually start in that order. The things you've done with these boys and the things that you're excited to do that maybe you didn't get a chance to do with them.
Yeah. And like I said, a lot of them we did get to do, they just weren't formalized, and having something to it. You guys who get to know me quickly understand that I like memorializing things. I like either creating spaces and events that build memories that we can hold on to. And the 5 love languages, gifts is how I like to give. My wife at certain points has said, just, sometimes you got to stop. Quit getting me stuff. We got too much stuff. But I love figuring that out. So we've been doing that all along, but doing it in an intentional way where the boy understands the process. So what I wish I had been able to do with Jake, and I'm doing more with Zeke, is define that liminal space and help him understand, and really it's 10, 11, 12 years old. The Jewish bar mitzvah is right in that area. It's when puberty starts coming in. These kids are already figuring out that they're not fitting in, something's changing. And that's a great starting point. And I'll back up because I was going to start and tell you what I did with Jake. So for me, what I've come to understand is that so much of life, we as men will compare ourselves to others, and we do that to our detriment. And it usually leads to frustration and despair or pride. And so what I've taught my boys for a long time, because they can work really, really hard, and they always have, but it doesn't always lead to the results they want. I've tried to help them understand that where our current culture and all this technology we have can put a GPS in your hand that tells you exactly where you are, I want them to live their lives where they'll get that understanding. They'll know where they are. I tell them always to remember who they are and whose they are. But then I want them to throw the GPS out, and I want them to go buy a compass. And I give my boys headings or bearings, like what they're aiming for. And I don't want them to check anymore how far they are from where they want to get. So part of what I did with Jake is we tried to define really clearly what it would look like to become a man, a truly authentic man. And we worked off of a model that I came across in one of Michael Gurian's books called The Purpose of Boys.
Yep.
And that guy's great. I got to meet him a number of years ago and have loved his stuff ever since. So we adapted some of what they described in their book. And what I did with Jake, being older and wishing I'd started sooner, is we went through the 6 characteristics of a godly man that he lays out in that book. And I found 5 other men to join me in this. So I got both of Jake's grandfathers, his youth pastor, and his FCA coach along with me. And we each took one of these characteristics of a godly man, and they wrote a letter. And I asked them to write a letter to Jake addressing both his current self and his future self and what they expected of him, and to drop in some advice about stuff that he might be facing, some things they see in him that are good, that they want to see more of, some things they see in him that might be challenges that he needs to work on. And we spent 3 days out in the wilderness campsite, throwing axes, shooting guns, eating steak. And he had a couple of his cousins and his younger brother. Oh, and I had one other guy, a really close family friend that had been a part of it. And that guy brought his sons. So Jake had some young relatives and some young friends, along with 6 mentors that he looked up to, 6 men that he felt each at least classified some part of what he wanted to add to his life as he became a man. And we gave him arrows, and I'll show you here what we gave him. So he's got this, it's called a pocket holster, and he's got these 6 arrows that have the 6 characteristics etched on them, or wood burned into them. And inside the bag, he's got letters from each man. So each man presented him with a letter, a couple pages long, that they read to him, and then they gave him this arrow. And I've yet to go back and watch the video because there's so much crying by the men and by Jake, and so much emotion and just raw connectedness there that came out of this. And it's funny, he went up to college, and he's looking through what's allowed in the dorm and what's not, and no weapons are allowed in the dorm. He's like, I'm sneaking these in. I'm not going up there without these. These letters are going with me, and he's shared with me that he's taken them out and he's read them at different times.
Yeah.
So that's what we did with Jake, and it was a powerful thing that he keeps coming back to. In hindsight, I wish I had started a little differently, but like I said, we've been talking about these things, and we kind of formalized it with him at 18 in kind of a hurry up mode. I had been hoping to do it a couple of years earlier with you at that event, and things conspire and delayed that. But I didn't want him going out our door without a send off and without a connection. And the other thing that we made really clear is that every one of these guys, as they were handing him these arrows and these letters, not only invited him, but challenged him to stay in touch with them and to call him when he's struggling, and to share his good things with them. They want to hear about what's going on.
I think that's really, really powerful. I mean, obviously the letters and the arrows, right? Because you have, like a totem, like an artifact that somebody gave you, right? That's meaningful. Something that's different, right? I don't have my keys on me, but I still have the keychain that you gave all of us at the live event that you attended in June with us at the accelerator retreat for Colorado. And it's very meaningful to me, like that keychain, because you talked about moments and the power of moments. And every time I see that keychain, I think about moments, right? I think about what you told us when we were on the top of Pikes Peak. And it's very meaningful to me. The one thing that I'll say too about, rites of passage is that I wholeheartedly believe, and I didn't at first, I did, but I didn't, it's, I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to take my boys through a rite of passage, then it has to be me. And what I can tell you is, as you did so eloquently as well, is that it shouldn't be just you. It needs to be other like-minded men like you. And I think that's the key. Other like-minded men like you that also are part of it in some way, shape, or form. I think about, when I've gotten to know Bedros Koulian, who's come on the podcast, who's got the Squire, the whole reason he had the inception of the Squire was because he took his son Andrew through a rite of passage where, there was all kinds of things that he kind of did with him, but there were 3, 4, maybe even 5 other men that were included in that and taught him lessons as well. And there's a lot of power in that. And, I even think when we were at the Squire, the 4 instructors that took us through everything, each instructor had their own flavor to add to the event, to the experience. And here's the cool thing too, is that depending on what is going on in my son's world, I will say to him, what do you think instructor Steve would say about that? What do you think instructor Ray would tell you? Right. And then that way, because depending on the situation and the things that I heard these guys talk about while they were at the event, it's like their own little area of expertise. Right. And, so like, one of the guys talked about, the importance of making sure that you're around the right people, like the right friendships. Like if you're around the kids who are doing drugs, stealing, skipping class, that's who you're going to be, right? Your circle determines your future. And if it's an issue with like that going on in my kids' lives, I'll be like, hey man, like, what do you think? What do you think Bedros would say about that? Mm-hmm. If it's a discipline thing, like, hey, like, I am going to trust the process. I'm going to do this thing to achieve my goals, whatever that thing is. What would instructor Steve tell you to do? Right. Cause he's big into discipline. So I think it's really, really important. And I do, it's kind of heart wrenching at times, right, Bill? Because like we want our kids, we want our boys to like listen to us, but they will to some degree, but another man could have a very similar or the same message and it have a different impact. Right. And that's really okay. Because at the end of the day, it's really about them getting the lesson, not necessarily who it's coming from, but that they're getting the lesson, and they're getting a lesson from, actually, I take that back. I think it's really important of who they get it from, because if that person doesn't maybe have a good moral compass, then it probably isn't going to land as well. But
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
But it doesn't have to be you.
Exactly.
And that's so just quickly, as I was coaching football, I was a soccer player as a kid. And so when met my wife. I wasn't into sports at all or anything. And then our boys, at 4 or 5 years old, start getting into sports big time. And I gotta be there and doing it with her. And she was amazed and surprised. She's like, where did this sports thing in you come from? I was like, well, I gotta help them. Like, they love it, so I'm gonna love what they love. And by the time they got into middle school, and I'm having to figure out, I want to coach football, because I mean, let's be honest, there's some terrible coaches out there trying to relive their glory days that they never got. And I didn't want that. And so I'm stepping in, but I didn't know, my X's and O's. And what I realized is I was able to recruit some great assistant coaches who didn't want to lead this thing. They didn't want to be the one responsible for all the emails to the parents and for all the problems. I was willing to take that on, but they knew the X's and O's of things that I didn't know. And by qualifying and picking the right guys, I didn't have to worry about it. And my boys got to see me trusting other men with something I'm not good at. And it took a little while, but I figured out that's a powerfully impactful thing for them to see me go to somebody and ask for help and let them help me. Because what I don't want my boys to do is grow up, struggle with pornography or exposure to alcohol or temptations of any kind and feel like they got nobody to go to. So what you said there, you want it to be the right people, you want it to be good people, but it doesn't have to be you.
I agree. And the other thing too is, inviting them, or at least exposing them to other relationships where they can go to for certain things, right? Because if you really want to have if you want to earn some compound interest on your guilt and shame of whatever it is you're going through, just keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. That just makes it all way, way worse. Well, so you have developed your own rite of passage now. And as we record right now, you're at your rite of passage, because this releases here at the end of August. But what can you share some things that you're going to be taking?
Yeah. Well, and so I'll tell you what I'm doing actually, as this is airing, is what I'm calling an initiation, actually, because, and I alluded to this earlier, and we'll be doing some things to help men that are in my situation, like I was with Jake, where they're 17, 18 years old, and maybe they haven't done anything formal and they want to get something before their kid moves out of the house and they want to cram it all in there. But I have started seeing, as I mentioned, that liminal space really as a place that is super valuable. And this is part of what I was talking about and why I love that you took your sons up that mountain, because mountaintops are like that. They're thinner air. Yeah. They're a place where we feel exposed and out of our element. And we tend to recognize, even though Pikes Peak, as high as it is, has got a donut shop and a gift shop up there. Yeah. And I think I was near you when we were talking maybe with one of the cashiers and talking about, they kind of get used to the elevation, but it's still not something you want to just hang out at. And if we didn't have the conveniences of electricity and some of the stuff we have, you couldn't stay up there. You couldn't stay up at that elevation long term. You got to go back down. And it's in those thin spaces, though, where so much of the distraction and so much of our comforts are removed, that we have the revelations that create these powerful moments and that open us up for new understanding. And so I've started understanding and really getting excited about the idea of at a young age, 10, 11, 12 years old. So, I'm looking forward 20 some years down the road, maybe, when I get to be a part of helping my grandkids do this. But it starts with an initiation into a process, and we build a lot of expectation for our sons that over the next 4 to 6 years, I, as your father, and several other men that are important, are going to lead you through these things that will culminate in a rite of passage. Be that at 17, 18 years of age. It might be a little different for every boy. But what we're going to be doing as this is airing is taking some young boys and their dads who are really intentional about wanting to take the next 4 to 6 years of their life and lead their boys in such a way that when they hit 17 or 18 years old, they've gone through this process, they've received these arrows, and they know as they step out into the broader world of manhood, which I've even wanted to stop calling an arrival. It's just, you've entered a new journey, because as you know, we don't ever figure it all out. And as soon as we do, the challenges level up in front of us and we've got to get better in a new way. So I'm excited about doing that. We're going to be equipping these men with some tools for that journey. We're going to be doing a very similar thing. So South Sister here in Bend is the third highest mountain in Oregon. It tops out at just over 10,300 feet.
All right.
But I've talked with a number of guys that have done all the 14ers in Colorado. And one in particular said that South Sister kicks its tail in every way, just for the sheer steepness. And then I think the last mile of it is nothing but a scree field where you gain 1,500 feet of elevation in a mile. But the amazing thing is at the top of it, you can look north, you can look south, you can see 9 peaks, you can see 3 states, and you're looking down on a glacier-fed lake right below you.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And so it's in that thin space that you work really hard to get to, but you don't want to stay at, that you gain some perspective. And so the boys are going to walk away with their fathers with that powerful moment, that powerful connection to the fact that we won't always see what's coming, but we're going to be giving you intentionally these tools and these bearings that will help you through whatever you encounter along the way. So I'm excited about connecting the dads with their sons. You know, they're going to have a struggle. It's going to be depending on the fitness level and the grit of the men that show up for this and their boys. This averages between 6 and 12 hours, depending on the people. So we're going to be taking off early, 6 a.m. from the trailhead, and looking to get this thing done. And we're going to be throwing axes. We're going to be shooting some giant slingshots out into the lake that we're staying on. And the whole point of it is that we end up where we aim. And, you know, a lot of us as men feel like we aren't qualified to lead in all of these areas. But the biggest thing that I want to instill in my sons is that whatever you're aiming towards, that's where you're going to end up. And there'll be struggles between here and there. I'm here to help you. You've got these other men that want to help you. Don't be deterred by the challenges in front of you. Keep pressing forward and understand that, you know, you won't necessarily have a really clear picture of where you end up. You know, all my son cares about right now more than anything is playing football and loving God. But I don't know how long football is going to go for him. But I do know that because of these characteristics of a godly man that we've instilled in him, he's going to be okay when and if football is no longer his primary thing. And that's what I'm hoping to help share with other men.
That's really cool. And I want to expand upon that one point really, really quickly. A lot of our kids, man, they find their identity in whatever sport that they do, right? And if they don't have it, then they're just lost, man. Like they don't know what to do, right? Mason and I, my 14-year-old, we're watching this Netflix series right now called All American. It's a true story about Spencer James, and one of the players in the show, it's revealed that he has some sort of like odd heart condition. He can no longer play, and he had like this full ride to this college and all this sort of stuff. And you could just see like the kid was like, "Oh my God, like what now? Like this is my whole life. This is not only is this my whole life, but this is my identity. This is who I am." And you could just see like this kid just lost himself in that one moment, right? So I think it's really important, especially for young boys during rites of passage and that kind of thing. It's like, hey, let's not only find out what you love to do, but let's find out who you are, right? And I love how you also incorporate this relationship with God and these other things that are most meaningful. So I know we obviously, you have this event coming up in August. When are the next 1, 2, or 3 of these?
So we'll be doing a winter challenge that'll probably be in January of 2023, and not fully defined yet whether that's going to involve just some snowshoeing or maybe some snowmobile type stuff. And it'll probably be aimed at a little bit older age group for that one. And then realistically, we'd like to do 3 or 4 of these a year, and they will vary back and forth between the more on the initiation side for the younger kids and also on the rite of passage at the end. You know, one of the things you mentioned there and that I want to touch on too is it really is important to get the generational connection there, you know, and like I said, I got my dad and my father-in-law involved, and we had some younger guys that were Jake's age there as a part of it. I see that as really being important. And that's something when those things come up and the dreams that we have in front of us are taken away, we need people who are further down the road that can tell us, oh yeah, I remember this, or I remember that. I mean, we're going into troubling financial times right now. What a blessing it is to have people that have gone through the Great Depression to be able to say, hey, calm down. The world's still here. You know, it's gonna be all right. And so much of the culture and the media around our kids right now portrays an image of their fathers being buffoons and idiots, and you know, the whole okay boomer thing and all of this stuff. I love that my kids have people, and it sounds like your boy does after the Swire program, older than him, that he can look to, and it's not just some old guy whose experience is unrelated. So connecting them to an older generation and creating that, when all the other stuff around them that felt like was stable is removed, those people and those relationships are still there.
That's so cool, man. And because that's one of the coolest things that really comes out of these, I think, is these, when you go through, like, it's one thing to meet people. It's another thing to experience something that is, quite frankly, uncomfortable, right? When we share a little bit of uncertainty and discomfort and maybe even some pain, that tends to unite us, right? Not to say that your event's like a beatdown or anything like that, but you're removing the everyday comforts out of these kids' lives, right? And the men too, to immerse yourself into what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be learning, and how we're going to be interacting with each other. So it's really cool, man. I love what you're doing. It is so needed. We need 100,000 of these things per year, to be honest. Like, boys need this, especially now, because you don't want TikTok raising your kids. Like, dude.
Well, and honestly, you know, I know we've got guys in the dad age group that are older and their kids are well beyond this. This is something that the guys in that stage of life, empty nesters, look to the single mom that lives on your street. Look to the kids who don't get to see their dad as often, or all of these different ones. The teams that I coached, baseball teams, football teams, man, I can't tell you how many kids we would take out to our rural property. They'd never camped. They'd never been outside of the city. You put a BB gun in a kid's hands, you show him how to shoot a target, and he lights up in a way that he never had before. So it's not just for guys that are at that prime spot where their kids are about to hit puberty that need this. We need men who are willing to engage. The future of our country, the future of our families rests in men taking a good quality leadership role, looking beyond just what serves them, looking beyond just making a paycheck, and making an impact in their communities. It starts within your home. Raise good kids that will be, you know, a good next generation, but look outside of that circle. You know, take the opportunity to, you know, if you've got an extra seat in the vehicle, take another kid camping with you. You know, do some things. Our house has always been a place where there's tons of kids around, because I want my kids to feel comfortable inviting their friends over to be exposed to something that they might not have in their own home. You know, whether that's a loving relationship between a husband and a wife, or just, you know, kids feeling comfortable to ask their parents tough questions. It can be really uncomfortable, but it's so valuable.
I agree with that so much. One of my boys' friends has like this really just hard home, you know. And I won't go into detail out of the privacy of this kid, but I always encourage, you know, my son, and I'm not even going to say which one, because I don't want to even give any breadcrumbs of who this kid is. But I'm always like, man, have him over as much as you want. Like, let him have dinner with us, you know, like, let him see and experience, like, you know, a fun loving, you know, loving household, you know, where the husband loves the wife and the wife loves the husband, and we joke with each other and we love each other and we compliment each other and we praise each other, and like, have them over. I think that's really, really important. Bill, this is awesome, man. I want to make sure that all the men who want to connect with you on your next several events, that they know how to get in touch with you and they know how to get more information. So how do they do that?
Shoot me an email, bill@menoftraction.com, or, you know, I don't know what the wisdom is in putting a phone number out here. I don't really care. I'm open to talk to anybody.
I'd be careful with that one, only because you just never know who listens to the show and grabs your number and then does weird stuff with it.
So you know who Bob Goff is?
No.
So he's an author. He's written a number of books. Love Does, everybody always. He's a pretty big guy. Look him up. He puts his cell phone number in the back of every book, and he answers his phone always. And
Wow.
it led to some amazing conversations and some weird things. But yeah, got Bob Goff.
Sure.
But yeah, shoot me an email there. For the guys in the accelerator, they know how to find me on Mighty Networks. And I'd love to talk about this. As you can tell, I get a little long-winded because I'm passionate about it. I think, raising our children, boys in particular, because fathers are important, but also our girls, in a way where we help them understand what's expected of them and we connect them to other generations, I honestly feel is the key to solving 99% of the ills of our nation.
Totally
And
agree.
if we can get the family fixed, so much is going to get fixed with it.
Yeah, Meg Meeker came on the podcast and she said, if you put an intentional dad under every single roof of every single house in America, or at the very least, an intentional dad on every corner of every street in America, the world as we know it would change. And the majority of the crap that we see on a daily basis that's absolute chaos and drama would go away overnight. Yeah. And if you don't believe that, if you look back on, I think it was last year in 2021, dads on duty. Mm-hmm. It was 7 dads in Louisiana, right? There was this high school where there were fights breaking out all the time. There was just violence all the time. It was just absolute craziness, and where the teachers and the staff felt unsafe to be there. So did the students. So these 7 dads took it upon themselves to make T-shirts, and the T-shirts just said "Dads on Duty," and they're like, "We're not gonna get into anything. We're just gonna walk the halls and be nice to people. That's all we're gonna do. Walk the halls and be nice to people." And the violence in that school completely went away overnight. They were interviewed on several different podcasts, on several different news stations, and like literally the violence went away overnight. So if you don't believe me or you don't believe Bill, you have way more power, gentlemen. I'm talking to you. You have way more power than what you think you do in these kids' lives. Bill, what's the name of this rite of passage? What's the name of your company?
So Men of Traction is
Traction.
what I do. So Traction is a kind of a mashup of true action. What I've been about for the last few years is trying to create a space and events where men can actually take some true meaningful action. So much of our lives are just busy motion that doesn't move the needle. And I want to see men take some true action. So for the guys out there that are thinking about this, but not sure, do it. Okay. I mean, the worst thing that could come from this is you absolutely hate it. You never want to see me again, but you understand a little better what your son needs. When we sit and we pontificate and we think about these things, but we don't take action, we're just left with what's in between our own 2 ears. And so much of the gold in this stuff is being exposed, rubbing shoulders with other men.
Agreed.
And I want to thank you, Larry, because I mean, I have shared this in some of our accelerator calls. Without this group, I wouldn't be here doing this now. I'd be years down the road. I'd be waiting for the kids to be out of the house, and then I'd be late to the game. And so much of what we regret is the things we didn't do, not the things we did. So.
Oh my God. I so agree with you, man. Dude, you're doing good work in the world, and I can't think of anybody better to do it. I think that what you're doing is amazing. Gentlemen, you're not going to have to, don't worry about necessarily finding or remembering Bill's email address. We're going to have all of his contact information minus, we're not going to put his phone number in there, but his social media, his email, all that good stuff. All you have to do is head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday66 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday66 for this episode. Bill, this was awesome, man. Men of true action, men of traction. I love it. Good stuff you're doing in the world, my friend.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here, man.
You bet, man. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.